Adolf Hitler caused the deaths of 50 million people. An entire nation followed him to ruin. He was hated by those he persecuted and even by some of his own commanders. Yet in 25 years, no one managed to kill him. Winston Churchill had very few bodyguards, whilst Hitler had thousands. He needed them. During his travels across Europe, there were over 40 attempts on his life. Now, with access to captured original SS records, the producers of Churchill's Bodyguard can reveal for the first time in this new series how fate and a small number of hand-picked bodyguards helped this evil genius to cheat death on so many occasions. Why did no one manage to kill Adolf Hitler? Enough people wanted to. But, as this series shows, it was not as simple as it sounds. The infamous Night of the Long Knives was Hitler settling old scores like some mafia boss, wiping out most of his deadly enemies in one long, bloody session. But it was also a test of loyalty for his closest companions. Would they step up and commit murder for him? He wanted everyone close to him to taste blood that night. The Blood Purge, as it was also called, was the climax of a bitter rivalry between the brown-shirted SA and the black-uniformed SS over who could provide the best protection for Hitler and his Nazi dynasty. It was a battle of the bodyguards. The Night of the Long Knives had its origin in the extraordinary character of Ernst Röhm. Born in Munich in 1887, he came from a family of prominent civil servants. Röhm joined the army and served in the trenches of the Western Front during World War I. As a company commander, he was severely wounded during the assault on Verdun, receiving the scars that disfigured his face. It was during active service that Röhm developed a loathing for the Prussian military establishment.
We have got to produce something new, some new organization. The generals are a lot of old fogies. They never have a new idea.
He was a natural revolutionary. At the end of World War I, the victorious Allies were determined to make sure that Germany could never go to war again. The Versailles Treaty slashed the new Weimar Republic's army to just 100,000 men. Captain Röhm was one of the elite kept on. But Röhm's life took a new direction in 1920, when the army instructed him to infiltrate a small right-wing party, the German Workers, or DAP. It was then that the 33-year-old captain first heard a former corporal speaking. Adolf Hitler articulated the rage Röhm felt against the politicians who had let down the troops and created the mess that Germany was in. In July 1921, Hitler was elected leader of what he renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazis. Within days, he had selected Röhm to organize a unit to guard party meetings and disrupt those of opponents, the Sturmabteilung, or SA. But Röhm was not confirmed as its leader. Hitler wanted someone with a higher profile, and he found that in the popular war hero Hermann Göring, who joined the Nazis in 1922. An ex-fighter ace and winner of Germany's highest award for valor, the Polo Merit, or Blue Max, Göring was put in over Röhm's head. It was the beginning of a feud which was to have fatal consequences. At the same time, a smaller group of SA men was hived off to be a personal bodyguard for Hitler called the Stosstrupp, or Assault Squad. It was the beginning of the SS, which was eventually to become the most fearsome and sinister organization in the Nazi state. As the SA grew in numbers to become a paramilitary force that would challenge even the authority of the regular German army, the SS broke away to become an ultra-ruthless elite. It dedicated itself to the personal protection of Adolf Hitler and the destruction of all his enemies outside and inside the Nazi Party. The later rivalry between the SA and the SS would explain much of the ferocity of the Night of the Long Knives and the eventual fate of Ernst Röhm. In 1923, Röhm took part in Hitler's Munich Putsch and was imprisoned when this collapsed. After his release, Röhm waited eagerly to revive the SA once Hitler was also freed. But he was severely disappointed. Hitler no longer favored armed revolution. When he re-entered politics, he wanted to pursue a constitutional path to power. Hitler wanted the SA to go back to being a political militia, guarding meetings and providing muscle on the streets. But Röhm disagreed. He wanted the SA to be a paramilitary revolutionary organization, capable of seizing power by force. The clash culminated in 1925 with Hitler sacking Röhm. He thanked him wholeheartedly for his early support, but he could not tolerate a revolutionary and semi-independent SA. Disillusioned, Röhm sailed to Bolivia to work as a military advisor. In the meantime, Hitler gave command of the SA to an ex-Freikorps commander, Captain Pfeffer von Salomon. Within 5 years, Hitler had achieved his aim of winning electoral support and stood on the verge of gaining power in government. This was largely due to Germany's plunge into deep recession after the Wall Street crash of 1929. Thousands of unemployed and frustrated young men joined the ranks of the SA Brown Shirts. It soon became a massive force which rivaled the power of the small Reichswehr army. In its ranks were many left-wingers who believed strongly in the socialist aspect of the Nazi Party. One of these was Walter Stennes, leader of the SA in Berlin. In September 1930, he led a mutiny accusing Hitler of betraying the Nazis' revolutionary cause. This uprising was quelled with the help of the SS and the police, but it was a dire warning for Hitler. He took direct command of the SA and sent a message to Röhm in Bolivia asking him to come back as his deputy and get a grip on it. It was a tremendous gamble. Hitler had already sacked Röhm once because he wanted to turn the SA into an independent band of revolutionary warriors. But now Hitler had little choice. The SA was getting out of control, and he knew Röhm was a ruthless disciplinarian. Events had moved on since Röhm had last seen Hitler. The Führer had grown in stature as a national politician. Surely that must mean that Röhm would toe the line. Röhm was flattered and excited by the new task. But as the brown shirt ranks formed up behind him in their hundreds of thousands, he got the same yearning to transform this tremendous energy into a revolution. It was exactly what Hitler didn't want. But this time the SA was not the only Nazi force in town. Hitler could call on the SS, and it was only too willing to square up to the troublesome SA. The SS's ruthless leader, Heinrich Himmler, had marched with Röhm during the Munich Putsch attempt and was, theoretically, his subordinate. But now he saw his boss as a rival to be undermined and destroyed. And as Röhm's power mushroomed, there were plenty of other people who would be only too happy to destroy him, not just to prove their loyalty to their Führer, but also to further their own ambitions. Ernst Röhm proved a brilliant leader of young thugs. He organized the SA like a general and greatly increased its membership. From some 100,000 men, Röhm doubled the figure within a year, and by the end of 1932 he commanded over 500,000 brown shirts. The potential threat from this horde alarmed not only the government, but other parts of the German establishment, including the regular army. The SA was now 5 times larger than the Reichswehr. Generals viewed it with envy and fear. Röhm made no bones about his ambition to turn his brown shirts into the real defenders of the Third Reich, a people's army that would remove the old-fashioned Prussian establishment. Many years later, Walter Stennes described his ambitions.
He wanted just the SA to be so powerful that they could control the army and by and by replace the army.
But Röhm had a major weakness. He was a voracious homosexual. He appointed many of his gay friends to high ranks within the SA, and the brown shirts were soon notorious for their scandalous sexual behavior. Hitler at that time had no strong feelings against homosexuality and ignored the behavior of Röhm and his comrades. He said the SA was not a moral institution for grooming young ladies, but a club for fighters. But frequent sex scandals did not play well among other, more prudish members of the Nazi Party. Heinrich Himmler, Röhm's subordinate and head of the SS, considered homosexuality to be degenerate. He wanted it rooted out. This gave him ample excuses to act against Röhm, as his aide, SS General Karl Wolff, later recalled.
Excesses have always happened and will always happen. What is decisive is how the leadership reacts at any given moment to stop these excesses. We in the SS always insisted that action should be taken.
On the 30th of January 1933, the SA celebrated as Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. But he headed a coalition government, and many members of the political establishment were wary of his brutal methods. The SA hoped complete his grip on power by grabbing control of many government institutions throughout the country. They violently crushed opposition from the communists. They ran riot in the major cities, imprisoning and torturing rival politicians. British journalist Hugh Green later recalled his first impressions.
When I started work as a journalist in Germany in the winter of 1933, I saw the stormtroopers in the days of their glory, the strutting bully boys of the streets in every town and village, sure that they, 4 million strong, were the masters now.
Röhm was at the peak of his power, but success was going to his head. He wasn't content with dominating the existing political system. He now wanted revolutionary changes. The Reichswehr's generals were well aware that they were a prime target and complained to the new chancellor about Röhm's parallel army. Major General Walter von Reichenau, a senior officer in the War Ministry, suggested that the SA might be combined with the Stahlhelm, a massive reservoir of ex-soldiers, to become a militia under the control of the Reichswehr. Surprisingly, Röhm seemed to accept the idea, but then ensured that once the Stahlhelm had been absorbed, the massively enlarged SA remained under his control. He was now in charge of a paramilitary army numbering a startling 4.5 million men. Outwitted, the generals appealed directly to Hitler to curb the growth of the SA. The Führer seemed reluctant to confront his old comrade and attempted to cobble together an agreement. Behind the scenes, Röhm was contemptuous of the Führer's peacemaking. At a dinner in March 1934, drunk and surrounded by his SA cronies, he let rip his true feelings.
I have not the slightest intention of me keeping this agreement. Hitler is a traitor, and at the very least must get out. If we can't get there with him, we'll get there without him.
This was high treason. One of the SA officers present was Victor Lützer. Shocked by Röhm's words, he traveled to Hitler's private residence, the Berghof, to report them. The Führer listened to Lützer, but still seemed reluctant to take action against his old friend Röhm. Hitler might hesitate, but Röhm's growing power had the effect of bringing two dangerous enemies together against him. Röhm's ambitious deputy, Heinrich Himmler, had been engaged in a bitter power struggle against Hermann Göring. The Reichsführer SS wanted to complete his control of Germany's police forces by taking over that of Prussia, which was Göring's fiefdom. But both men now realized that Röhm and his massive army were a far greater threat. Göring agreed that Himmler take over the Prussian force, including its dreaded secret police department, the Gestapo. In return, Himmler would support Göring's drive to command Germany's armed forces, an ambition which was being blocked by Röhm. In April 1934, the two men persuaded Hitler to put the Prussian police force, including the Gestapo, under Himmler. By combining the SS and the Gestapo, Himmler now had a powerful machine to take on the SA. The Reichsführer SS instructed his ruthlessly efficient deputy, Reinhard Heydrich, to draw up plans to eliminate Röhm. He was determined that henceforth he would control the internal security of the Reich and be the man ultimately responsible for Hitler's bodyguard. In mid-1933, the threat that the SA might pose to Hitler's safety had seemed proven. A brown shirt was spotted in the grounds of the Berghof. SS security guards thought he was acting suspiciously and arrested him. A gun was found on him, and he seemed intent on assassinating the Führer. Now, 9 months later, the three most ruthless men in the Third Reich, Göring, Himmler and Heydrich, were determined to destroy Ernst Röhm. Only their leader, Adolf Hitler, remained indecisive. Himmler and Heydrich began to gather evidence against the SA. But apart from a few SA arms dumps, there was surprisingly little proof of any plans to rebel against Hitler. It was mainly unsubstantiated rumor. Despite this, the plotters were soon rewarded. For Hitler was now forced to recognize the harsh political necessity of acting against Röhm, whatever pangs of guilt he might feel about betraying his old street-fighting comrade. On the 10th of April 1934, he went to Wilhelmshaven and boarded the pocket battleship Deutschland. The official reason was to review a naval exercise. But while on board, he held a secret meeting with General Werner von Blomberg, the Minister of War, General Werner von Fritsch, Commander of the Army, and Admiral Erich Raeder, head of the Navy. Hitler agreed to curb Röhm and the SA in return for military support to make him president when Hindenburg died. Nevertheless, Hitler still hoped to avoid force. On the 4th of June 1934, he had a 5-hour private discussion with Röhm in the Reichschancellery in Berlin. He tried to convince him to scale down the activities of the SA. Röhm agreed to take a break. He would go to Bad Wiessee, a resort south of Munich. The entire SA was ordered to stand down for the summer. But the pressure on Hitler continued to grow. On the 16th of June in Venice, during his first state visit to Italy, his fellow dictator, Benito Mussolini, urged him to muzzle the SA. And the next day, without warning, in Marburg, Franz von Papen, the non-Nazi vice-chancellor of Germany and one of the men who had miscalculated so badly in bringing Hitler to power, made a speech criticizing the excesses of the Nazi regime, by which he meant Ernst Röhm's brown shirts. The Nazis managed to stop the speech from being broadcast and seized all the newspapers which printed it, but von Papen's action had wakened a more formidable foe. On the 21st of June, President Hindenburg summoned Hitler to meet him. The aged head of state told his chancellor that unless he acted immediately against the SA, martial law would be declared and the army used to crush it. Hitler now knew he must act quickly. Time had run out for Röhm. He was a sacrifice that must be made if the Nazis were to remain in power. Himmler's SS plotters went into action. As his adjutant, Karl Wolff, later described, secrecy was paramount.
Contingency planning was very secret. Nothing was done in writing. All preparations were verbal. One did not want to alert the SA.
Himmler, Heydrich and Goering were ready to use the opportunity to settle old scores, and death lists were prepared.
Those lists were mainly drawn up between Himmler and Goering. Goering had to approve all the names. Goering had been put in overall charge of the entire operation, Operation Hummingbird.
Sometimes, embarrassingly, it was found that the lists included allies of the other side. Goering insisted that Rudolf Diels, former head of the Gestapo, be saved. He had served Goering well, not least by opposing Heydrich and Himmler's plots. In order to keep up the facade of normality, Goering went with Röhm to the wedding of the Berlin SA commander, Karl Ernst, a man whose name he had already put on the death lists. Like some mafia godfather, having made his decision, the Führer wanted everyone close to him to dip their fingers into the blood of the comrades they were about to kill. Everyone must demonstrate their loyalty, and that included many of Hitler's personal bodyguards. On the 25th of June 1934, Rudolf Hess delivered a furious speech aimed at Röhm.
Woe to him who breaks faith in the belief that he can serve the revolution by causing revolt. Woe to him who sings his flat feet among the fine threads of the Führer's careful plans, hoping to force the pace. He is an enemy of the revolution.
Unaware of the cataclysm which was building up, Röhm and his senior SA commanders now headed south to the Pension Hanselbauer at Bad Wiessee. They relaxed rather than plotted, but meanwhile the plot against them was coming to the boil. On the 28th of June, Hitler flew out of Berlin for a wedding in Karlsruhe, and then on to Essen to begin a tour of work camps in the Rhineland. He stayed at the Hotel Drießen on the banks of the Rhine. On the afternoon of the 29th, he cut short his visits and went back to the hotel. That evening, he was joined by senior Nazis, among them Joseph Goebbels, who warned him that an SA putsch seemed imminent. Shortly afterwards, Goering telephoned to confirm that Karl Ernst had put the SA in Berlin on alert. The implication was that the coup had begun. At 9:30, Victor Lutzer, the SA officer who had revealed Röhm's boast about removing Hitler, arrived and assured Hitler of the loyalty of the bulk of the SA. Then Hitler telephoned Röhm in Bad Wiessee, telling him to meet him the next morning. At the same time, Sepp Dietrich, commander of the SS Leibstandarte Regiment, was told to fly to Munich and take command of the SS forces there. In Berlin, the rest of Hitler's Leibstandarte were made combat-ready at their base at Lichterfelde. 2 final phone calls convinced Hitler that he was taking the right action. The first came just after midnight from Himmler in Berlin. He said that Karl Ernst had now ordered a general mobilization of the SA units in the German capital. It was a lie. The streets were quiet, and most of the Berlin SA had gone on leave. The second call was from Adolf Wagner, the Bavarian Minister of the Interior. He said that SA troopers were protesting against Hitler in the streets of Munich. That was a lie too. But it was too late. The Nazi Party had Röhm in its sights and would not let him go. At 1 in the morning of the 30th of June, Hitler left the hotel for Bonn Airport. Dietrich was telephoned in Munich and instructed to take his SS units to Bad Wiessee and await Hitler's arrival. At Bonn Airport, Hitler's personal transport, a Ju-52, was warmed up. Hitler's car took about half an hour to reach the airport. Then at 1:50, the plane took off for Munich. As it did so, Himmler and Heydrich in Berlin were alerted that Hitler was on the move. They went to the Gestapo headquarters at Prince Albrechtstrasse. As his plane flew south, Hitler braced himself for what was going to be the most deadly day of his rule so far. This would be the test of his control of the Nazi Party. Would the men he most trusted stand by him, or would he end up being betrayed and killed? At the Pension Hanselbauer, his intended victims slept on, unaware of the horror which was heading their way. The 30th of June, 1934. Hitler reached Munich at 4 in the morning, intent on murder. He went first to the Bavarian Ministry of the Interior, where local SA commanders had been told to gather. They were arrested and taken to Stadelheim prison. Then he set out from party headquarters for Bad Wiessee to confront the rebel brownshirts face to face. For this dangerous mission, he chose to be accompanied by his closest and oldest comrades, among them former bodyguards such as Emil Maurice and Julius Schreck. Erich Kempka drove. He was Hitler's personal chauffeur and one of the 8-strong elite close escort, the SS Begleitkommando. Victor Lutzer and Joseph Goebbels were also part of the hit squad. They arrived at Bad Wiessee at 6:30 a.m. The Pension Hanselbauer was unguarded, and the SS men burst in. Then Hitler and 2 bodyguards, revolvers in hand, raced up to the first floor where Röhm was asleep. As the door was kicked open, Hitler shouted, "You traitor!" Dazed and confused by the sudden appearance of his old friend, Röhm meekly put on his clothes. Then Hitler went to a nearby room and hurled open the door. Senior SA Commander Edmund Heines had forgotten to lock it and was found in bed with his chauffeur. Hitler's reaction was witnessed by a hotel employee, Hans Hausjahr.
And Hitler was screaming like a madman, "You pigs, you should be shot."
The arrested SA men were locked in the basement of the hotel. Shortly after 7:30, Hitler, Lützer and Goebbels set off back to Munich with the arrested senior SA commanders. Wisely, they chose to return by the longer route round the south of the lake, in case SA men loyal to Röhm decided to attempt an ambush on the more direct northern route. In Munich, the arrested SA chiefs, including Ernst Röhm, were taken to Stadelheim prison. By 10, Hitler and his accomplices had reached the Brown House party headquarters. From there, Goebbels telephoned Goering in Berlin and uttered the single word Kolibri, hummingbird. It was the code for the blood purge to begin. Himmler and Heydrich now unleashed the Berlin part of the murderous plan. Karl Wolff was one of the key men in carrying it out.
I was alerted during the night of June the 30th at my flat in Berlin with orders to pack the minimum: toilet things, a clean shirt, and to report to Goering's private residence. We were each given a room equipped with special telephone lines. We spent the next 3 days, up till July the 3rd, making telephone calls. I think we made something like 7,000 calls. The wires at one time were literally glowing.
SS agents fanned out all over Berlin to start rounding up the enemies on their hit lists and taking them to the Leibstandarte headquarters at Lichterfelde. Over the next 24 hours, scores of confused men were taken from the cells and shot, many of them still shouting Heil Hitler, unable to believe that they were regarded as traitors. The hit squads disposed of some important victims more summarily. General Kurt von Schleicher, the last chancellor before Hitler, was enjoying a sunny day at home. 2 SS men entered his study and shot him dead. When his wife ran in, she was shot too. The problem was the general had nothing to do with any SA revolt. Gregor Strasser, an early rival to Hitler for the leadership of the Nazi Party, was tortured by the Gestapo before being shot. Hitler's vengeance reached back a long way. Ritter von Kahr, the former Prime Minister of Bavaria who crushed the Munich Putsch, was found hacked to pieces in a wood near Dachau. Like a mobster chief, Hitler was settling old scores, and his henchmen lined up to prove their worth. Back in Munich, ex-bodyguard Emil Maurice was dispatched to kill Father Bernhard Stempfler, a man who knew too much about Hitler's relationship with Geri Raubal. He was found with 3 bullets in his heart and a broken spine. This murder helped rehabilitate Maurice in Hitler's eyes. He was forgiven for being so unwise as to also have a relationship with Geri. Kurt Gildisch was another one of Hitler's bodyguard who needed to prove his loyalty. Just that month he had been sacked from command of the Begleitkommando because of his drink problem. Based in Berlin, Gildisch's first task was to kill Erich Klausner, head of Catholic Action and a critic of Hitler. Having done this, he was sent by air to Bremen to arrest Karl Ernst, whose wedding Goering had attended just a few days earlier. Ernst was leaving on a cruise for his honeymoon when Gildisch intercepted him. He thought it was a Nazi wedding joke in extremely poor taste and submitted to being handcuffed and flown back to Berlin. Mercilessly, Gildisch escorted him to the Lichterfelder barracks for summary execution. While the blood flowed in Berlin, back in Munich, Hitler faced a crucial decision. At the top of the list of senior SA commanders now being held at Stadelheim was his old comrade Ernst Röhm. Could he really betray a man who had stood by him in the early struggles? While Hitler struggled with his decision about whether Ernst Röhm should die, it was the turn of Sepp Dietrich to prove his loyalty. He was instructed to select a firing squad and then proceed to Stadelheim prison with a list of 6 senior SA officers who were to be executed immediately. Röhm's name was not on the list. Dietrich arrived at the prison at 6 p.m, but was told by its governor that the order for execution had not been signed. Dietrich returned to the Brown House, but Hitler had already left for Berlin. Adolf Wagner, Minister of the Interior, had to sign the list on behalf of the Führer. As the first SA officer was led out into the courtyard of the prison, he asked Dietrich, whom he knew well, what was going on. Dietrich replied bleakly that he'd been condemned to death by the Führer. An SS officer then confirmed the sentence, and the Leibstandarte firing squad shot him. But even Dietrich could not stand seeing the entire massacre carried out. He left before the last brown shirt was executed. By the end of that blood-filled day, the men who had been chosen to protect Hitler against attack were no longer passive bodyguards, but active assassins. The final death tally for the Night of the Long Knives was at least 85. The families of many victims received letters claiming that they had been court-martialed and shot for treason. German radio and newspapers hailed the murders as the justified crushing of an attempted coup against the government. As Hitler flew back to Berlin on the evening of the 30th, the life of one of his oldest comrades hung in the balance. Ernst Röhm was still alive, and Hitler seemed unconvinced of the need to kill him. Now that the threatened SA revolt had been crushed, surely he could be let off. But on his arrival, he was confronted by colleagues who had very different ideas. It took several hours of argument next morning at the Reichschancellery for Hitler to be convinced that Röhm must die. The Führer kept hoping his old friend would spare him the decision by committing suicide, but Röhm refused. He could not believe he had done anything wrong to cause the wrath of his friend and leader. Eventually, Hitler succumbed. At about 2 in the afternoon, SS concentration camp commander Theodor Eicke was dispatched to Stadelheim prison. With 2 SS gunmen to back him up, Eicke arrived at 3 p.m. on the 1st of July 1934. Röhm was sitting in cell number 474, stripped to his waist and sweating heavily. Eicke strode into the cell and told Röhm that the Führer had given him one more chance to redeem himself. He left a pistol on a table beside a newspaper with a headline screaming that Röhm had been dismissed and arrested. But Röhm did not pick up the pistol. His old friend had no reason to demand his death. After 15 minutes, Eicher re-entered the cell and 2 shots were fired. Although felled, Röhm was still breathing. A 3rd shot to the chest finished him off. At almost the same moment that his old comrade was being murdered, Hitler was watching a march past of the band of the Berlin State Police. Hitler the man claimed to be depressed at the slaughter of so many long-serving party members. However, for Hitler the politician, the night of the long knives was a triumph. As Albert Speer, his architect and confidant, later reported,
Hitler was happy because he heard from Hindenburg that he okayed the whole action, and Hindenburg made a remark. He said, when history is made, blood must be shed.
The generals too were delighted. They no longer had to fear the SA as a rival and rewarded Hitler's blood sacrifice by pledging to support him when President Hindenburg died. The power of the SA was broken. Many Germans, both inside and outside the Nazi Party, breathed more easily. Victor Lutzer, betrayer of Röhm, became head of an SA cut down in size and kept on mainly for ceremonial purposes. The other big winner was, of course, Heinrich Himmler. His SS was now the undisputed master of Hitler's security services. Goering's Gestapo had already been absorbed into the SS machine, and now Röhm was dead. No one could rival Himmler, and no one could resist his black uniformed guards. In a speech to the Reichstag on the 13th of July 1934, Hitler justified his action by saying that Röhm had planned to have him assassinated. Himmler had eliminated this threat. Some of Hitler's closest companions, many of them his personal bodyguards, had proved their loyalty by killing his enemies. They now knew better than to step out of line. Hindenburg died on the 2nd of August 1934, and his body was transported to a mausoleum at Tannenberg, the scene of his greatest victory in World War I. With Hindenburg out of the way, Hitler absorbed the title of president into his own role as chancellor, making himself absolute head of state. From now on, he was known simply as the Führer, the leader of his people. The German army gave its ultimate blessing to Hitler's dictatorship. Everyone in the armed forces took an oath of allegiance, not to the nation, but to Hitler personally.
I swear before God this sacred oath, I will render unconditional obedience to Adolf Hitler, the leader of the German nation and people, supreme commander of the armed forces. I will be ready as a brave soldier to sacrifice my life at any time for this oath.
By doing this, the German army submitted completely to Hitler. It created a whole new army of bodyguards sworn to protect him. It seemed Hitler had silenced all his enemies, but Nazi infighting was not completely over. Far from making Hitler more secure, the Night of the Long Knives added angry, betrayed SA men to the long list of his potential assassins. Over the next year, assassins from their ranks, calling themselves Röhm's Avengers, killed more than 150 SS officers. Ernst Röhm's spirit at least had a bloody revenge. There was another group of Germans who took no pleasure at all in Hitler's rise to absolute power: Germany's Jews. Hitler had already made it clear that his regime was dedicated to removing them utterly from German society. Some Jews hoped that now that Hitler had what he wanted, he might leave them alone. He had used anti-Semitism as a crude electoral weapon, but now it might be dropped. With this in mind, from 1934 to 1938, Jewish emigration out of Nazi Germany actually slowed down. But other Jews saw this merely as the lull before the storm. They believed that if German law and democracy could no longer protect them, then they would have to take their own measures to defend themselves. And that meant killing Adolf Hitler.
There's a brand new and exclusive Hitler's Bodyguard coming up at 5 p.m, or another chance to catch it tomorrow morning at 11. Next, though, a German sniper team have the Prime Minister in their sights. It's Churchill's Bodyguard.